Welcome to the Peak Intrigue. And you know what that means? Another deep dive. Today, we're diving deep into Confucius. You know, the guy whose ideas, they've shaped billions of lives. I mean, isn't it wild to think that this guy's wisdom, revered all over the world now, was pretty much ignored when he was alive?
It's incredible, right? Rejected by the rulers of his time, but his ideas, they ended up forming like the bedrock of Chinese society and spreading way beyond Asia.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we're mainly using this YouTube documentary. It's called Confucius, 551 BC. Ancient China's philosopher who changed the world. We'll be uncovering his story, starting with his, kind of unique beginnings. I mean, his birth itself is like a mix of history and legend.
Yeah, it really is. His father was an older man already, had 9 daughters and 1 son, and the son was said to have a physical disability, so the family really wanted like a healthy male heir.
So they went on this whole pilgrimage to a sacred mountain, Mountain A, to pray for a son. I mean, that alone tells you how important lineage and having sons was in ancient China.
Oh, absolutely. And according to Sima Qian's biography, which was written about 400 years after Confucius died, his parents even conceived him in this like ritualistic tryst in the wild. Adds a little drama to the story, don't you think?
Yeah, it kind of humanizes him. It
Yeah.
reminds us that even these huge figures like Confucius, they came from like humble beginnings, relatable beginnings.
Exactly. Sima Qian's work is this fascinating blend of facts, oral history, maybe a bit of artistic license thrown in. It's like the first real attempt to document Confucius's life. He drew upon all these stories and legends that were floating around about him.
So while we maybe shouldn't take every detail as like gospel truth, it gives us a glimpse into how people saw him, the narratives that built up around him.
Right, and it also highlights the crazy political climate of ancient China during Confucius's time. Imagine a land divided into these warring states constantly fighting for power.
A stark contrast to the like peaceful, harmonious society we usually associate with Confucianism. How did he come up with his philosophy and all that chaos?
He looked to the past, specifically to the early Zhou kings, who ruled about 600 years before him. Their reign was seen as a golden age, peaceful and stable.
So he was looking back in time, trying to find a way to fix a broken society.
He thought the Zhou dynasty's success came from their deep respect for lie, a concept that's often translated as like rights, customs, and etiquette, basically what he saw as the glue holding society together.
Lie as social glue. Can you explain that a bit more?
Think of it as a code of conduct woven into every part of life, from grand ceremonies to everyday interactions. It wasn't just about being formal, it was about respect, community, and keeping social order.
So lie is more than just like stuffy rituals then. Were there any specific examples of how it showed up in daily life?
Even something as simple as greeting someone. There were specific ways to address people based on their age and social status. These gestures weren't random. They were meant to reinforce respect and keep things harmonious.
So even small gestures played a role in the bigger picture of social interactions.
Exactly. Confucius saw lie in everything: family relationships, how you treat your elders, how you behave in public. It was about knowing your place in society and acting accordingly.
That feels relevant today, where common courtesy and respect sometimes seem to be fading. But how did Confucius learn about these ancient rites he valued so much?
Well, in 518 BC, when he was 33, he went on a journey to the old Zhou capital, modern-day Luoyang. He was searching for knowledge right at the source.
A knowledge pilgrimage. Driven by this desire to understand how a truly harmonious society works, what did he find there?
He immersed himself in studying these rituals, especially the elaborate ancestral rites. People believed those connected the human world to the cosmos.
Those ancient rituals have always fascinated me. It's like peeking into how people understood their place in the universe.
Absolutely. These rites usually involved offerings of food and wine to ancestors. They believed the ancestors lived in heaven and could talk to the gods. The careful preparation and reverence involved, it was all meant to instill respect and responsibility.
So it was about more than just keeping the ancestors happy. It was about shaping people's mindsets and behavior.
Precisely. And remember, this was a time when bronze was used to make both weapons and these incredibly beautiful ritual vessels. Confucius saw those vessels as symbols of peace. He was highlighting how human skill and creativity could be used for harmony instead of destruction.
That's powerful imagery, especially given all the warfare going on around him. Did his focus on lie extend beyond these big ancestral rites?
It was completely woven into his philosophy. He believed that by practicing lie consistently, even in like everyday stuff, we cultivate empathy and consideration for others. and ultimately that contributes to a more harmonious society.
It's an idea that's still relevant today, isn't it? That even small acts of courtesy and respect can make a difference, create a more positive social environment.
Exactly. And this belief in the power of individual actions to shape society, that's a core part of Confucian thought.
But did Confucius ever get the chance to put his ideas into action, to actually implement them in the real world rather than just talking about them?
He did. When he was 50, he achieved his greatest political success. He was appointed Minister of Crime in his home state of Lu.
Okay, now this is where things get interesting.
Yeah.
He finally had the chance to apply his vision. Did it work?
According to Sima Keen, when Confucius implemented Lu, it led to a remarkable transformation in Lu. The state became more prosperous, more harmonious.
So it sounds like his ideas were taking hold, they were actually working.
Huh.
But if that's the case, why did he eventually leave his position? What happened?
Well, remember the rival state of Qi, the one that was always threatening Lu? They came up with a plan to undermine the Duke of Lu, who had adopted Confucius's ideas.
Politics, right. What did they do?
They sent the Duke this lavish gift, 120 of their finest horses and 80 beautiful dancers, a blatant attempt to distract him, corrupt his leadership.
Sounds like something straight out of a historical drama.
Yeah.
Classic tale of power and seduction.
And it worked, unfortunately. The Duke got so caught up in these extravagant gifts that he neglected his duties, He abandoned the principles of good governance that Confucius had worked so hard to establish.
Must have been crushing for Confucius to see his efforts undone like that.
It was a huge setback. He tried to convince the Duke to get back to work, to uphold Lai, but the Duke just wouldn't listen. Disillusioned and disheartened, Confucius decided to leave Lu.
So he went from having real political influence to like a self-imposed exile.
He did. He took a group of his loyal disciples and they set off on a journey across China, hoping to find a ruler who would genuinely embrace his vision of a harmonious society.
Yeah, it was a journey driven by, both disappointment and this unwavering hope. Confucius spent 14 years traveling all over China, facing hardship, uncertainty. He just kept looking for a leader who'd listen.
14 years is a long time to hold on to an ideal, especially with all that rejection. How did that period of exile shape his thinking? It was a time of huge growth for Confucius. He really refined his ideas. And it was during these tough years that he came up with one of his most important concepts, the Junzi. It's often translated as the morally noble person.
I've heard of Junzi, but I gotta admit, I don't really get it. What did Confucius actually mean by that?
So picture a person who embodies virtue, moral excellence. It doesn't matter what their social status is. That's the essence of the Junzi. They're defined by their character, their actions, not their birthright or how rich they are.
So in a society obsessed with social hierarchy, he was saying that real nobility came from within, not from external factors. That's pretty radical for his time, right?
Oh, absolutely. It was revolutionary. Confucius contrasted the Junzi's leadership, which was based on virtue, with the typical ruler who relied on force and coercion. He argued that true authority comes from moral strength, not brute power.
And this idea, which came from his own experiences with corrupt leaders, ended up influencing Chinese political thought for centuries.
Exactly. Confucius believed that a society led by Junzi, people who put the well-being of others first and ruled with fairness and compassion, that society would thrive. I mean, it's a vision that still resonates today, wouldn't you say?
For sure. But how did he think you could, cultivate these Junzi? Did he believe that anyone could reach this level of moral excellence?
He did. And this is where his disciples come in. They were a really diverse group from all walks of life, merchants, warriors, scholars. Some even had, let's say, shady pasts.
So he wasn't just teaching some elite group of scholars. It was open to anyone who wanted to learn and improve themselves.
Exactly. He saw potential for Junzi in everyone. He believed that through education, self-cultivation, striving to live a virtuous life, anyone could become morally excellent.
Were there any, standout individuals among his disciples?
Many of them became influential figures in their own right. There was Zigong, this successful merchant known for his sharp mind. He proved that Confucian principles could be applied to, the world of business and commerce.
That's interesting to think about how Junzi could translate to different professions, different social roles.
Right. And then there was Zilu, a warrior, famous for his courage, but also kind of impulsive. He often challenged Confucius, pushing him to explain his teachings more clearly.
So even in his inner circle, there was room for debate, different perspectives. Sounds like he encouraged critical thinking, not just blind obedience.
He did. Confucius believed that true learning meant questioning, grappling with ideas, engaging in thoughtful discussion. It wasn't about memorizing stuff or accepting what you're told without thinking about it.
That says a lot about his approach to education. But going back to the Jinzi concept, how did that ideal shape his overall political philosophy?
It led to the idea of political meritocracy. It's a system where leaders are chosen based on their abilities and virtue, not their family background or wealth.
So he envisioned a government where the most capable and ethical people were in charge, regardless of their social status. Seems incredibly progressive for his time.
It was. He believed that a society could only truly prosper if its leaders were chosen for their merits and their commitment to the common good. It makes you think, how different would our world be if that idea had taken root more firmly in different societies throughout history?
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought. Makes you question how we choose our leaders today. What qualities we actually prioritize. But before we get too sidetracked, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. Confucius's belief in the importance of family.
Right, right. Family is fundamental to Confucian thought. He emphasized Zhao, usually translated as filial piety, which is all about respecting and honoring your parents and ancestors.
Shao is a concept that I've always found really interesting, especially how central it is to Chinese culture. Could you explain how it fits into Confucius' philosophy?
Confucius saw strong family relationships as the bedrock of a stable and harmonious society. He believed Zhao wasn't about blindly obeying your parents. It was about developing virtues within the family unit, like respect, gratitude, responsibility.
So it's more than just following rules, it's about understanding how different generations are connected.
Exactly. Shao is about caring for your elderly parents, upholding family traditions, honoring your ancestors, recognizing their sacrifices. It's about acknowledging what you owe to those who came before you and understanding that your life is part of something bigger.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Make Shao sound less like rigid tradition and more about appreciating the continuity of life. Did Confucius actually talk about this concept directly in his writings?
He did. There's a text called the Shaojing, which translates roughly to classic of filial piety. It's attributed to Confucius and his disciples. It lays out all the duties and responsibilities children have towards their parents, emphasizing respect, obedience, and care, even when things are difficult.
So it was like a guide to building strong family relationships and respecting elders. Do we know how influential this text was in Chinese society?
The Shaojing had a huge impact. It shaped family dynamics and social values for centuries. Even today, the principles of filial piety are still important, although how they're expressed might have changed as family structures have evolved.
That makes sense. It makes you think, how do our own family structures and values today relate to Zhao? Do we see traces of it in our own lives, even if we don't call it filial piety?
It's a really good question to think about. The specific ways filial piety is expressed might be different across cultures and time periods, but the core idea, respect and care for family, especially elders, that seems to resonate everywhere.
It does seem like a timeless value, even if how we live it out looks different. But let's get back to Confucius's journey. After all those years of wandering, did he end up going back to his home state of Lu?
He did. He went back when he was 68, but not to get back into politics. Instead, he devoted the rest of his life to education, to shaping the minds of future generations.
Makes sense. After years of advising rulers, he turns his attention to developing potential junzi, who might actually embody his ideals. What did this later stage of his life look like?
He started an academy and attracted students from all over, all eager to learn from the famous sage. He didn't just focus on Lai and Chao, though. He developed this whole curriculum based on the 6 arts, skills he thought were essential for, well-rounded individuals.
6 arts, what were they?
They covered a whole range of disciplines. There was Lai and music, which were seen as vital for social harmony. Then you had calligraphy, mathematics, charioteering, and archery.
Wow, that's quite a mix. I wouldn't have thought archery and charioteering would be part of a philosopher's teachings.
It might seem strange, but Confucius believed that physical skills were just as important as intellectual development. He saw them as ways to cultivate discipline, focus, balance, and a sense of respect for tradition, all qualities that Gen Z needs.
That's a very holistic view of education. Mind and body both matter. Makes you wonder what a modern-day Confucian curriculum would be like. But didn't Confucius also contribute a lot to literature during this time?
He did. It's believed that he compiled and edited some of the most important texts in Chinese history. They came to be known as the 5 classics.
The 5 classics are like a cornerstone of Chinese culture. I have to admit, though, I'm not very familiar with what's actually in them. Can you give me a little rundown?
They're a collection of ancient texts covering poetry, history, rituals, music, and political philosophy. They weren't just his own ideas, though. He saw himself as a curator, someone passing on tradition, making sure that the knowledge and values of earlier times were preserved for future generations.
So he was like a bridge between the past and the future, ensuring the continuity of Chinese culture through these texts.
Precisely. His work on the five classics had an enormous impact on Chinese civilization. It shaped the intellectual and moral landscape for centuries.
Amazing how his efforts to preserve and transmit knowledge ended up shaping the future so profoundly. But did these texts stay purely academic, or were they put into practice in Chinese society?
They became the foundation of China's famous imperial examination system, this really rigorous set of exams used to choose government officials.
So if you wanted to climb the ranks of government, you had to show you'd mastered these ancient texts. Talk about a tough selection process.
It was incredibly demanding. Candidates had to memorize tons of passages, write essays, and show a deep understanding of the Confucian classics. Very few people passed, but the ones who did, they got prestigious positions in the imperial bureaucracy.
It sounds like a system designed to find not just the smartest people, but the most virtuous ones to lead.
That was the idea, at least. The imperial examination system, rooted in Confucian thought, played a huge role in shaping China's political and intellectual elite for centuries.
And did this system have any lasting effects on Chinese education? Do we see any signs of it today?
Oh, absolutely. The Gaokao, China's super competitive university entrance exam, is often seen as a modern version of the imperial examination system.
So the pressure to do well on exams is still very much alive in China.
It definitely is. The Gaokao is a make-or-break test. It determines a student's future, just like the imperial examinations did.
It's remarkable to see how Confucius's influence still echoes today, shaping the educational journeys of millions. But tell me, how was he seen after he died? Did he get the recognition he'd wanted during his lifetime?
Not right away. While he was respected as a teacher and a philosopher, it took centuries for his ideas to be fully embraced by those in power.
So his journey from being kind of obscure to widespread recognition was a long and complicated one.
It was, but during the Han Dynasty, about 500 years after his death, things started to change drastically.
So we've seen how Confucius was rejected during his life, but then how his ideas started to gain traction in the centuries after his death. What was it about the Han Dynasty that caused this big shift in his legacy?
Well, the Han Dynasty, it was a time of unification and cultural consolidation in China. The ruling elite saw in Confucianism this philosophy that could bring order and stability to this vast empire.
So they needed a way to unify a diverse population under some kind of shared ideology, and they found it in Confucius's teachings.
Exactly. His focus on social harmony, respect for authority, and moral cultivation, it really resonated with the Han emperors. They saw how powerful his ideas were. They could legitimize their rule and create a more unified society.
Do you have any specific examples of how they actually promoted Confucianism during this time?
Well, they made his teachings the basis of the state education system. That way, future generations would be, steeped in Confucian principles. And they also built temples dedicated to Confucius all across the empire, elevating him to a status almost like a deity.
Temples for Confucius. Sounds like he was going from philosopher to cultural icon.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Building these temples was a clear sign that Confucius's ideas weren't just philosophical theories anymore. They were deeply connected to the state, the whole cultural fabric of China.
It's pretty amazing to think about how a man who was basically ignored during his life ended up as a symbol of Chinese identity. What kind of impact did this have on how ordinary people saw him?
Well, him being elevated to a cultural hero, it really cemented his influence on generations of Chinese people. His teachings became the guide for personal conduct, social interactions, even how the government was run. His wisdom, it spread through every level of society.
Did we find any physical proof that shows this change in his status?
Actually, yeah, we have. When archaeologists excavated Han Dynasty tombs, they revealed some fascinating insights into how Confucius was viewed back then.
Tombs can be like these amazing windows into the beliefs and values of past civilizations. What have we learned from these excavations?
Well, the carvings and artwork in the tombs, they often depict Confucius alongside these important historical figures and even deities, It suggests that he was held in incredibly high regard. It's visual evidence of his transformation from this marginalized thinker into this revered cultural figure.
Are there any specific examples of these tomb depictions that stand out?
There's this one really striking discovery from a tomb that dates back to the 1st century AD. It has this detailed portrait of Confucius, one of the earliest known representations of him. He's shown as this wise, dignified figure holding a scroll, symbolizing his role as a teacher, and a transmitter of knowledge.
It's like we can actually see his posthumous rise to fame through these archaeological finds. But his story doesn't stop there, does it? The 20th century brought some huge changes to China, with big consequences for traditional beliefs. How did Confucianism handle this turbulent period?
Well, Confucianism faced maybe its toughest challenge during the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s. This was a time when traditional values were rejected.
Yeah.
There was this push to create a brand new socialist society. Confucius, with all his emphasis on hierarchy and tradition, became a target. People criticized him.
So the very things that made his philosophy attractive to past rulers, the focus on order and stability, were now seen as holding back progress.
Right. Anything that was associated with China's feudal past, including Confucianism, was condemned. People wanted to wipe it out.
What happened to the Confucian sites in Koifu, his hometown?
They were badly damaged. The temples, the historical places, they were vandalized, neglected. It was all part of this campaign to get rid of the four olds. Old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas.
It's sad to think about these places that had so much cultural and historical significance being treated like that. Did Confucianism disappear during this period, or did it somehow survive?
Well, it faced its darkest moment for sure. But ultimately, it showed its resilience. You see, as China went through this rapid economic development and social transformation in recent decades, people started to rediscover how relevant Confucius's teachings were.
It makes sense. It's like a natural human reaction to search for something solid to hold on to during times of fast change and uncertainty. What aspects of Confucianism connected with people in this new era?
Confucianism, with its focus on ethics, social harmony, and personal growth, it gave people a framework for navigating the complexities of modern life. They found comfort and guidance in his timeless wisdom.
And how did this renewed interest show itself? Was it just academics rediscovering him, or did it reach other parts of Chinese society?
Oh, it went way beyond just reading old texts. Confucian values started popping up again in education, media, even in how businesses were run.
Businesses, that's interesting. How do these ancient Confucian principles fit into the modern corporate world?
Well, there's this fascinating case of a company called Jinghua Petrochemicals, one of China's largest oil refining companies. They've actually integrated Confucian values into how they manage things, emphasizing ethical conduct, teamwork, respect for employees.
That's not what you'd expect. What made them decide to embrace Confucianism in their business model?
They believe that these values create a more harmonious and productive work environment, which leads to better efficiency and happier employees. They see it as a way to build a strong company culture based on, ethical behavior.
It kind of challenges the whole image of the corporate world being cutthroat and ruthless, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if ancient wisdom can really be relevant in modern business.
That's a question that definitely sparks debate. Some people see it as a way towards a more humane, more sustainable form of capitalism. Others are more skeptical. It's definitely a topic worth digging into more.
It definitely gives us something to think about as we try to deal with the ethical challenges of our time. So looking back on our deep dive into Confucius, what are the biggest takeaways for our listeners?
For me, it's just how relevant his ideas still are. Confucius dealt with issues that we're still struggling with today, the need for ethical leaders, strong family and community ties, and the power of education to shape people and whole societies. His wisdom, it goes beyond time and place.
I agree. His emphasis on virtue, social harmony, and the pursuit of knowledge, they still resonate centuries later. And there's one concept we talk about that's worth highlighting, Ren, which is often translated as like benevolence or humanity.
Ren, yeah, it's at the core of Confucian ethics. It's about developing empathy, compassion, a sense of being connected, recognizing that our actions affect other people and that we have a responsibility to contribute to the well-being of our communities.
It's a powerful idea, especially in our world, which is more and more interconnected, but also often so divided. It seems like a good place to end. This idea that by cultivating Ren, by acting with kindness, empathy, a sense of our shared humanity, we can build a more harmonious, more just world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Confucius. We hope his story and his ideas will keep you thinking and maybe even inspire you to make some positive changes.